Allan?
Well, there is also, I think, within the media, a certain bias that the population is not interested in policy, and therefore it becomes a self-fulfilling kind of cycle. If you give a big policy speech, if you're a politician, and no one covers it because it's deemed to be either too complex or too boring to interest the audience, then it doesn't take very long before you stop giving big, complicated policy speeches. And so we are in a vicious kind of cycle right now where the population's appetite for certain things is dictating and structuring our political class's behavior, and the political class's behavior is driving further cynicism among the population.
You know, Yeah, go ahead, Chantal.
No, but I in part blame the social media, to tell you the truth, because I think there was always a danger, and it's happening now, that the media that covers the politicians who are covered, and the junkies, all get this sense of engagement from the very instant gratification of Twitter, Facebook, and etc. And it's an illusion. It's a bubble versus what is happening on the ground. And so while they think there's a lot of engagement because this is happening really quickly, they are talking amongst themselves. And I think people are dropping off because of it rather than becoming more engaged because of the social media.
I think there's an interesting point there that Chantal is making, is that the immediacy of social media, the immediacy of media, the acceleration of the debate, one effect of that is it greatly enlarges, at least in our own minds, the significance of incredibly trivial moment-to-moment events.
Yep.
And I think that's what Chantal's saying. I certainly agree.
Who does this play into? Whose hand does it play into in terms of the campaign?
You might well say that the Tories, as with the 10-point lead that they have, would have a vested interest in people not particularly getting too much into their record or into substantive questions that they might have difficulty answering, not because they're the Tories, but because they're the front-running party. And so if we're spending 3 days talking about process questions, yeah, I'm not saying it's all part of a Tory plot, but it's not entirely displeasing to them, I imagine.
But it is policy that is lost in this. I mean, we mentioned last week one of the things that was surprising about this particular campaign, it is driven by social media, is how rapid the news cycle is and how this exponentially increases the prospect of gaffes. Chantal made the point, this is yes, and it means that these gaffes are forgotten in the next moment. And that's exactly what we've seen all this week. We're picking up all kinds of stuff that never would have made it to the national media in the past. Much of it is local in nature.
But let's not let the opposition off the hook here either. They would be grabbing more attention if they were doing more substantive policy departures. And not enough just to have policy. It's policy that's going to make a difference. It's policy that some people are going to oppose. You've got to be prepared to put out things that aren't just motherhood. It's things that will actually, be worthy of reporting, frankly.
All right, I want to switch the topic and move us towards next week, because one assumes the debate will at least make it a very different kind of week next week than this week has been at some level. Now, usually we get criticized for always going back to the Turner-Mulroney 84 and 88 debates, and that's always the example that's used. And our friend Ellie Alboim was saying, they're going to trot out all the same old clips this week. Well, I got a different clip to show you. Go back to the first televised debate in Canada, and it was 1968. A lot of things happening, but it's interesting to see how that debate night shaped up, because there were four parties, and the fourth party was the Créditiste, Réal Cahouette. They didn't let him in till the end because he just had seats in Quebec, but he did this kind of like the last half hour of a 2-hour debate. And this was one of the moments in it. And you listen to see what they're talking about. The question coming from Ron Collister in 1968. We tacked on the opening of the debate because it's just like so classic. Here it is.
The national debate, live and in color from Confederation Hall in the West Block of the Parliament buildings in Ottawa.
Mr. Cahouette, the past 5 elections have produced 4 minority governments. Mr. Douglas says he doesn't expect to win, and you cannot win because you're not fielding enough candidates. In view of the record of political instability that seems to accompany minority government, are minor parties not a liability in our parliamentary system?
I think that a minority government, a responsible one, can certainly receive the support in the House of members who are there, not for the pleasure of playing politics, but for the general good of the population.
I think in fairness, we have to realize that the kind of parliaments we've had in the past have prevented the government from making as much progress as it would have liked to on many of these bills. All I can say is that we will, if elected as the government party, we will govern as best we can. We're asking for a mandate, a strong mandate. Our ideas are there. The people will vote for them or not. But whether the result will be a liability or an asset is really, I think, an irrelevant question as far as I'm concerned.
Old Trudeau, he could all really put you down on those questions. Chantal, there are some similarities there. This whole discussion of minor parties, what role they play in, in holding up Parliament. What do we learn from something like that?
Well, that Pierre Trudeau won a stable government. Mm-hmm. And using, in other ways, the same narrative that Stephen Harper will be bringing to the debates and putting it to three people, and just the optics of these 3 versus 1 basically sends the message that the Conservatives have been hammering about stability and a stable government. But also there is a difference. Réal Cahouette, Tommy Douglas admitted that they weren't going to win. Our dynamics now is that they all want to be number 2. Gilles Duceppe wants to be number 1 in Quebec. Jack Layton wants you to believe that he's going to overtake the Liberals. And then you have Michael Ignatieff. So the dynamics are, if anything, even less productive than at that point.
Allan, what do you see?
Well, someone would look at that and say, what have we learned? I look at it and say, what have we forgotten? I mean, the fact of the matter is, at that point in time, minority governments were a real aberration. There's an argument today that minority governments are going to be the norm, certainly as long as the Bloc Québécois is around. The Creditis disappeared after that, and you had a long period of stable government, save for the 1972 to 74 period. But, in addition, you really have to ask whether these, whether they remember how productive those parliaments were, and in fact how much cooperation there was, both on an ad hoc basis but also on a more kind of permanent alliance basis. And that's the kind of system I think we're going to have to start adopting in Canada if we're going to have some stability, and we're not going to have parliaments always run through a lens of potential elections.
And first of all, there's nothing wrong with minor parties. If people choose to vote for their parties, that's their privilege, and they shouldn't be made to feel as if they were letting down the side that they should have voted for. Second of all, I don't think the problem is that we have too many parties. It's that we have a system that's not designed for it. We have an electoral system that's designed for two-party politics, and it works tolerably well when you only have 2 parties. But when you start getting 3 and 4 and 5, as we now have, the Green Party not being represented in Parliament yet, it breaks down, and it produces not the stable majority governments that people always boast of the first-past-the-post system supposedly producing. It's producing endless minorities, and minorities of a particular kind, because first-past-the-post also rewards regional parties. If you can bunch your votes geographically, like the Bloc Québécois, you get wildly disproportionate results compared to a party, like the Greens, let's say, whose support is spread relatively evenly across the country.
Interesting. Cahouette only got to be in part of the debate.
I couldn't possibly comment on that.
No, I wouldn't think you would. Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left. When we look towards next week and the debate, tell me what at least one of these leaders has to do in light of the kind of campaign we're doing, in light of the stakes that seem to be out there in terms of the various polls that we've seen. What will you be looking for, Chantal, first?
Well, it's Michael Ignatieff's last best chance to showcase himself as the alternative prime minister, and he's going to have a lot of competition and a lot of fighting to do to get that done.
Allan.
Yeah, I mean, truth be told, Michael Ignatieff probably needs a knockout in this to really change things. At the very least, what he has to do.
What is a knockout?
Well, it's hard. It's often when you see it, you don't even know it's happening. I mean, we've seen that many times where people have said, "Oh, this thing was kind of a draw," and then 2 days later they're going, "Whoa!" Because the media starts playing clips over and over again that selectively starts reinforcing a particular narrative.
And
about
most voters only see the clips.
Yeah, but at the very least, I think Ignatieff has got to surprise the electorate. He has to put on a performance that basically puts a lie to the caricature that the negative advertising has painted him.
I wonder whether Ignatieff is in fact going for the knockout. Everything about his campaign so far to me suggests they're actually just trying to hold the Tories to a minority. It's a very inert, not particularly adventurous campaign. I think if we see him in the debates trying to appeal to center-right voters, then he's still trying to actually win this thing. But if he just pitches as he has been to NDP voters, I think he's just trying to solidify that base and then try and take the Tories down after the election.
Chantal, what about Harper? What about Harper next week? He just sort of has to glide through that 2 hours?
Well, that is about the only game that the front-runner, who is also the incumbent, can play, frankly. Anything beyond that makes him look, especially him, too aggressive. Plus, he is debating 3 versus 1, and that suits their message so perfectly. that there's nothing he needs to do beyond turn himself into a punching bag, I think.
Yeah, he arguably has the easiest job, because what really he has to do, he has to be prime ministerial. And he's been in the job, and people, you know, even if they don't like them, they accept that he's got the qualities and the competence to occupy that particular job. If he could make the other guys look like they're irresponsible or not ready for prime time, that would be a bonus. But basically, he just has to look like the prime minister.
Okay, we're out of time. But you will be here on Tuesday night, and so will the Insiders panel. So we'll get a good review of what happened on the debate on Tuesday night. And it will also be live and in color, just like that one in '68.